Love, Desire, and Tension, Structural Editing of Nonfiction. What time is it? It's 1:15. So there's a small chance I might run over because I timed this to have 50 minutes of talking and 10 minutes of questions. But if you have questions and we don't have time to get to them, you can always ask me afterwards. I discourage running up onto the stage for any reason. Who am I? I'm James Harbeck. I've been an editor for more than 20 years. Structural, substantive, copy editing, proofreading. I've been a test setter for the structural and substantive certification tests for Editors Canada. I also have a master's in linguistics and a PhD in theater. I'm sure none of that's relevant at all. This session is about structural editing. If you're familiar with structural editing, some of this will not be new to you. So it's more geared towards people who are fairly new to this. Does anybody, by the way, have a bottle of water? I couldn't find anything like that out there.
There's a water fountain back here already.
Oh, thank you. If there's one thing we know about nonfiction, it's that it's not just about facts. People read nonfiction because they desire to know something, to get from where they are to where they want to be. It's an adventure, and the reader is the hero. Thank you. You're my hero for the moment. And we're here to get them there. The author is, but of course we're here to help the author. As I told one author, above all, the protagonist is the reader. The book is pulled forward by the reader's desires. Oh, yay! Above all, the protagonist is the reader. The book is pulled forward by the reader's desires, hopes for attaining them, obstacles to attaining them, and triumphs over those obstacles. You serve as the reader's proxy, the reader's inspiration, and the reader's teacher. The first thing in that is the structure. Now we think of structure, we think of, well-built things. But good structure in a book isn't like a building, stone on stone, held in place by its own weight, with rooms for the reader to go in and sit down. It's like a suspension bridge, held in place by tension, made for getting the reader from one place to another across a gap they couldn't otherwise cross. Now, not all books, admittedly, are like the Capilano suspension bridge in the picture there. I was going to use a picture of the Golden Gate Bridge, but I didn't have any that didn't have it obscured by my beautiful wife. So what do you do? But you want it to be held in place by tension. We always feel things about things. We don't always notice it. We don't always admit it, but we always feel things. We are rational beings. We rationalize everything we want. The main existence for reason in the human brain is to provide a suitable justification for the things that we want to do. People who insist they're strictly logical are the most susceptible to being led by their emotions because they convince themselves that the things that are most important to them are just objective facts. And they build whole castles of reason on the deck of a suspension bridge. Let me put it another way. We're like somebody who's walking a large dog on a leash. We think the dog is ours and is there to protect us and look after us. Obviously, the dog is emotions. Just making sure we control it by pulling on the leash. That seems to work. But one squirrel shows us how wrong we are. So, as an editor, you need to be aware of what emotions are involved, what people are going to want, what's keeping them from getting what they want. In fact, you even need to help them see more clearly what it is that they want or should want, and what things they need to get through to do that. And the first person you need to do that with is the author. You're not just working with a text, you're working with a person. I'll get to the reader's desires, don't worry. Probably even before the end of the presentation. No, that's the back half of the presentation. But let's start with the fact you're not just working with a text. You're working with a person. It's true in all editing, obviously, but it's even more true in structural and substantive editing than it is in copy editing. You're working directly with the author. Hopefully, you're meeting them. And I mean hopefully in both senses. We hope you're meeting them, and also when you meet them, it's very hopeful. They're hopeful, and you should be too. You're helping the author overcome obstacles on the way to getting their desires, such as they're not having enough of a distanced view of the book or article, and perhaps not having enough experience or enough confidence, or occasionally too much confidence. The number one thing, since you're helping the author to achieve their desires, you have to like the author. Now, I've worked on copy edits of books where I haven't really liked the author, and it's not ideal, but let me tell you, if I'm doing a structural or substantive edit and I don't like the author, this is an absolute blocker as far as I'm concerned. You have to like them, and you have to want them to achieve what they want to achieve. If you can't make yourself like their author or respect what they're trying to do, you're not going to do a good job, because your feelings are going to be pulling you in a different direction. Imagine, you're walking two dogs, there's two squirrels. You don't have to like them without reservation. Nobody's perfect. But you should be able to focus on what you can do to help them, which also means you need to meet with the author, as I said, get a feel for them. You don't have to do a high contact edit with lots of phone calls. And I say that, but the truth is with some authors that is literally inescapable. I worked on one book, an excellent book. It's out now. It's about a couple who are Canadian painters of note, and you won't have heard of it. And the author is a really good author, and he came into it with the idea that he was going to write stuff, and I was going to be there with them the whole way, showing him. It was very much of a back and forth. And literally, occasionally I would get phone calls from him while I was out shopping. So this is not normal. But it was worth it. Some editors see working on a manuscript as like a tug of war, and it is, but the mistake is to think it's a tug of war between them and the author. Hell no! You're pulling together. You both want the same thing. And what's resisting is really just the fact that writing and editing is hard work. So let's get to work. I'm going to focus for a few minutes on the process, and then we will talk about the specific questions we look at when we're trying to make sure that it works with the reader's desires. When I'm starting a book project, the first questions I ask are basic ones. What's the format? Hardcover or direct-to-trade paperback? Black ink or only, or with colors? What kinds of illustrations? And all of these things have to do with feelings too, because they affect what the reader's going to expect of the book, how they're going to feel about it, especially within the conventions of a particular genre. You have to market the book to the reader before they read it. Doesn't matter how good your facts are, they go nowhere if nobody buys the book to read them. And you have to market it to the reader again and again as they read it, so that they keep reading it, they feel good about reading it, they feel good about having read it, and they tell other people to read it. And since it's nonfiction, you may even want it to be persistently useful, so they come back to it again and again. I also ask, how long will it be? I once had a professor for a developmental drama course who, if you asked him how long an assignment should be, he would say, how long is a piece of string? The idea being, of course, it should be as long as it needs to be. Now, this applies in a wide variety of circumstances, but if you go into a store that sells string, you will find that it comes in a variety of standardized sizes, each suited to a particular purpose. And this is also true for books. Just how the book looks on the shelf and how it feels in your hand matters. A book can feel hefty without having a lot of information. It's a very interesting thing. Marketing also, the marketing department of the publisher needs to know the target page length for purposes of positioning and promoting and pricing. They need to know that a lot sooner than some people think. Probably many of you already know this. And the length of the book plainly affects its structure and how you approach it. And it's still true that a book does not need to be any longer than it takes to get the job done, but if you change the target length of the book, you can also change the jobs it can do. If that all seems pedestrian, The fulfillment of desires involves a lot of mechanics and a lot of people who desire different things, all working in the same process. That's a picture of a sculpture by Roland Emmett, by the way. Credit where it's due. Okay, so I have the book. The first thing I do with a book I'm going to do a structural edit on is read it through, of course. I might make a few notes as I go the first read through using Word's comment feature, but I can't see what I'm going to need to do to the structure until I've seen the whole structure. So I read it, and as I read it, I'm usually thinking things like, I'm not sure what to do here. I have no idea what I'm doing with this book. Am I even any good at this? I'm a complete fraud, aren't I? Help. This is normal. Once I've done reading it through, that usually takes a few days because I try not to do more than 2 or 3 hours in a day so that I don't sort of start to zone out on it. I set it aside for a day or two if I can, and I come back to it. And the second time, oh, I get it. Yeah, I can see where this is going and what I need to do, what needs to happen for it to get there. Why didn't I notice that before? Every time, it's like that moment in The Karate Kid or any superhero movie where the protagonist suddenly realizes that he or she knows how to do amazing things. And I mean, yes, white guy confidence, I know. They gave us the shots when I was in school. They probably didn't tell you about that. But I learned, where did I learn to do structural editing? I learned it in university, writing countless essays and later grading countless essays and writing theses and reading a lot of books and articles. The truth is, anybody who's coming into structural editing probably knows more about it intuitively than they think they do. Probably. Your mileage may vary. An ability to understand structure takes time to develop, but the odds are good that you have some intuitive understanding of it. And the second time I read through, I put detailed thoughts on the manuscript using Word's comment function. I don't normally do hands-on track changes on this pass, not till the second pass. I just put comments, overall thoughts and suggestions, and I'd also do a letter to the author and possibly an outline. This is because I gotta feed the author's dog. It's their book. By their dog, I mean their emotions. It's important for the author to maintain a sense of ownership and discretion. The author desires to have written a book. Not everybody likes writing, but almost everybody likes having written. And it has to be their book. If you take the reins too much, no matter how good the results you're getting, if they feel like they've lost control of it, they will ultimately have a late stage freak out and it will make a lot of extra work and the results won't be as good either. You gotta remember to feed the author's dog. Also, if they have a literal actual dog and you're near them, you can do that too if they let you. After the first structural pass, I should be delivering to the author a detailed letter with recommendations for revision. How detailed? Usually it's a couple thousand words. And I've also seen letters that other editors have written. And generally, I mean, it depends on the book. If it's less than 1,000 words, that's a very light letter and suggests that either the book is amazingly good or most of your stuff is in the comments. Yeah, on the other hand, if it's more than about 5,000 words, consider that the author's not going to read it all. There have been times when, after reading through the draft and talking with the author, I determined that I should do hands-on changes in the first pass. You can't apply an absolutely strict, regimented approach because people are different. And with all this, I'm also giving the author joy in the forward progress of the book, fear of all the work they're still going to do. I don't want them to be afraid, but they're going to be. And on the second pass, then I will accept all the author's changes from the first pass. Some people like to look and see what the author did and then say, okay, well, I told you to do this and you did this. That can be useful information, but in my view, you still have to deal with it on its own terms as they presented it to you. Because if you ask them to do a thing and they didn't do it, that's because their dog wasn't pulling them in that direction. And again, I'm not here to impose my own vision on the book. I'm here to help the author realize their vision. but I'm still looking for that flow, that tension. So I'll do the hands-on changes. If I think that there's some explanation needed, I'll put a comment on it. And I may make some copy editing level fixes, but here's the other thing. In general, I don't do too much copy editing, even in the substantive detailed phase, for a couple of reasons. First of all, it distracts from the bigger picture. It distracts me, it distracts them. Second, I said a couple, and by a couple I meant the loose sense of a couple. Second, you only have so much credit. You can't make infinitely many changes. Remember, every change, no matter how easy and obvious it seems to you, is actually going up and pulling a hair out of the author's nose. There's only so many times you can do that. And the third thing is, don't take bread out of the copy editor's mouth. Somebody else is going to get paid to copy edit this, and if they're being paid by the hour, why would you steal that from them? You don't want the author to feel like you're just being sloppy and inattentive, so make sure they know why you're just leaving these things. But yeah, let the little things go. So after I do all that, then, and I'm about to get to the things I look for, but I have one more little thing about the process I want to talk about. I will, after the author has gone over all my edits and made a few more changes in response, ideally we are at the resolving stage. Any remaining open issues of substance have been sorted out. I will do up a transmittal sheet for the publisher, which means I tell them what's going on, what the actual approved title is. Generally, there's been a big conversation about that, as you may know. Make all sorts of notes for the design department. Help all the people that this is going to be going to. The copy editor needs to have some idea of what to expect. These are all nice, wonderful people, and you want to help them. They all have their desires. It's a whole kennel, every publishing house, lots of dogs to feed. At least bring treats for them. And I do up a short email for the author and the project manager. I tell the author about the process from this point on, because the author may not realize that I'm about to jump out the aircraft door with a parachute on. They may expect me to continue to be involved in it. So I have to be clear that actually, not really. And I give happy valedictory statements. And then I click send on the email, and I swear I do this every time. I can't not make that gesture. And then I make an invoice. I love invoicing. I don't understand why some people hate billing. My wife coaches figure skating, and for reasons I don't understand, she just hates billing her clients. I love billing not just because I love getting paid, not just because it means the project is done, but because people value things they pay for. Starbucks discovered years ago that if they made nasty burnt coffee but charged enough for it, people would think it was brilliant. Actually, I drink Starbucks coffee too, but you know. There's obviously an upper limit, and you do have to deliver value for what you're getting paid for, but things are valued more when they're paid for. And I value getting paid. Yes, I do. It's one of the things I like the most. There's no reason that you can't have work you enjoy that pays well. Nobody goes into a super fancy, expensive restaurant and says to the chef, if I'm going to pay you this much, I hope you hated making it. No one values a painting less because the painter enjoyed painting it. Well, maybe somebody does, but I don't like those people. Okay. How do I deliver this value? How do I handle all of these emotions? The readers, the authors, mine. Let me talk about the how do I communicate this to the author for a moment. Some people, before I talk about what I'm going to communicate, some people will have learned the feedback sandwich approach, where you say something positive, then you give the bad news, and then you say something positive again. I don't like this. I think of it as the shit sandwich approach. Nobody likes eating shit. I don't take this approach partly because of that, partly because it can lead to giving insincere praise, which I am constitutionally incapable of doing. You just ask my wife. Fortunately, she's amazing. But also, mainly, the reason that I don't do that is that there is no bad news. When you are delivering the edit to the author, the substantive edit, your tips for revision, suggestions, it's all good news. It's good news. They've written a book. It's going to be a really good book. And here's how they're going to make sure it is. Look, imagine if somebody gives you a treasure map and you're like, oh man, I got to go up that river and through those forests and over those mountains just to find untold wealth. Like dig it out of the ground. What's on Netflix? Nobody complains about getting a treasure map. Well, if they do, then they're at home watching Netflix. And what you're giving the author is a treasure map. Your editorial advice means there's a good book and the author just needs to do some extra work to get there. Writing books is work. It's known. So here's something I wrote to one author. This book has a lot of potential. It has good stories, it has good insights, it has good advice. Once you've done your edits, and I've done mine in the next round, it will be sharp, clear, compelling, enlightening, and highly usable. To get there, all it needs is more and less. More focus with emphasis on the theme, the progression, and the specific things the reader can do, and less text overall. Specifically, less text that doesn't move the reader forward on the journey. So, the big things that we look for to highlight, find the emotions, work with the emotions, make the journey across the bridge of love, tension, and desire. I got rhythm, so do books. Of course books have rhythm. If you're reading a book, you get a sense of the flow of the information and you develop expectations. There is an ebb and flow of emotions. Sometimes I will actually do a spreadsheet of the lengths of the chapters and even the sections of the chapters in word count, just so I can see at a glance how they're going, if they have a decent sort of pace to them. Think of structure in a book symphonically. You start with an opening statement, dun 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 dun, dun 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 dun, and then it plays with that, dun 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 dun, and it has these moments, dun 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 dun, and then it starts again, dun 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 dun, etc., and so forth. Because the rhythm, even of music, is not just 4/4 time. Dun, 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 dun. It's also the bigger ebb and flow, the way it moves forward, holds back, moves forward, holds back. Hills and valleys, a journey. As I told one author, if you think of each subsection as like a day on an expedition or even a stretch between stops on a road trip, you will have a sense of the kind of similarity and variation in length that will feel most natural to the reader. Rhythm is not just the chapters. How's the flow of the text in the chapter going to be divided up? Sometimes it's very narrative and it just flows and you don't seem like you need any subheadings, but that does deprive the reader of landmarks. So as I told one author, good subheads are like grabbing somebody by the lapel and telling them an important thing before they can break free. Listen to me. I mean, kindly and gently. As I told another author, I've added subheads in various places throughout, partly for consistency of use, because the author in some places used subheads and in some places just didn't, and partly because they can help the flow. They're like planetoids with a gravitational slingshot effect. It does matter exactly what kind of nerd your author is. I used to have short hair. Subheadings help create and manage expectation, tension, and fulfillment. You don't want them to come at exactly even intervals. That's boring. But you also don't want to have subsections of a page, a half a page, 6 pages, 2 pages. You can vary them dramatically for effect, but you have to do it with an intention and a sense of the rhythm. The rhythm is always a matter of the ebb and flow of tension and desire. So the next thing to consider in this is the first impressions, not just in the book, but in each chapter. Everything is expected to be there for a reason, so you need a strong opening, but the strong opening also has to have a thematic connection and set the tone. If, for instance, it's a book about Tuscan cooking and it opens with a recounting of a fist fight in a restaurant in Florence, as one does, that had better be somehow emblematic of the rest of the content. So, as I told one author, you start this chapter with a certain amount of what editors often call throat clearing, along with some general statements of principles. But don't forget, in writing, unlike in banking, you need more than principle to get interest. I might add that in some kinds of literature, the less principle you have, the more interest you get. Anchor your opening with a good image, a good story, or both. You have some nails to pound in. Waving your hand at them won't do the job. Get something solid. If not a hammer, then at least your shoe. And it's the imagery that is the real anchor for, well, anchor, I mean, obviously not as in a thing that holds you in place, but rather as in a thing that grabs you and pulls you. It's the leash on the dog. It's the cables on the suspension bridge. It helps to have stories or metaphors or diagrams or examples or some combination so that the reader has something concrete, something visual to hang the abstract concepts on. And generally, it's good to bring those in early, even right up front, so that when you explain ideas afterwards, the reader will be able to relate the ideas to the concrete things right away. So, things I've told authors. It's important to give the reader a visual and emotional attachment to the subject. That creates concrete details for them to use in understanding the information and attention that pulls them forward. A good, clear picture of a situation with some emotional value and tension will always give the best structure of tension to attach the more abstract and theoretical and general points to. Make sure, though, to stay on point. Stick with one or two main images so you don't scatter the focus. Also, watch out for bringing in things you're enthusiastic about that might not be the strongest illustrations. This is a thing, if you're asking the authors to come up with images and illustrations, sometimes they will talk about things that they really love and that most readers will sort of not care that much about. Be specific with the images, relevant details that people will feel something about. It can be very subtle. Some writers will talk about what a person is wearing as they set the scene, for instance. And we have attitudes about these things. It does need to be relevant, and it should also not key into inappropriate prejudices. It's a world full of dogs out there. Make sure that you don't get any of them angry. If you talk abstract generalities first and then give a concrete example, yes, that can lead to useful aha moments. From time to time, you state your principle and then dive it in, but it does mean that the reader's hanging on to abstract things in midair for a time. So let's just say you start a chapter with consistent association of two independent stimuli can lead to one stimulus provoking a response appropriate to the other stimulus. Dude, okay. How about if you start a chapter with Pavlov found that if he rang a bell before feeding time for his dogs, the simple ringing of a bell would also cause them to salivate. I mean, okay, but how about in grad school, I used to eat a huge supper and then go to the library, and now I can't go into a library without needing to use the washroom. Or maybe a little better for most people's books. My grandmother always wore Chanel No. 9 when we visited her for her amazing holiday feasts. Now whenever I smell Chanel No. 9, I become hungry. This is, well, that's a lie, but I don't remember what perfume my grandmother wore, so I made it up. It has to be something that the reader is going to feel good things about, and that will give them a clear image. And problems are the next thing that you're obviously focusing. Everyone's in the solution business. To put it short, we're all bartenders. Remember, bartenders are literally in the solution business. But first, we're in the problem business, because you ain't got solutions unless you got problems. Readers either come to the book with problems, or they will soon learn that they have problems and they're going to feel strongly about them. As I told an author, start with the problem, not the solution, and go step by step. A problem is something people feel. Show them the problem, tell them why it's their problem, make them feel it, and then lead through the obstacles and challenges to the solution step by step, feeling by feeling. Sorry, give me a microphone and I'm unreliable. You're not just talking about solving the problem. In this book, you're actually solving it step by step, and they're feeling through it as they go. I remember my first year theater professor, Philip McCoy, telling us people read theater reviews for 3 reasons. Will it be any good? The play. Was it any good if they read it, the review after the play? Or, isn't that interesting? Well, Philip McCoy was a smart guy, but no one buys books for isn't that interesting, even if they think they do. If the bare minimum is the problem, how do I feel less bored? But that's not your target, because anybody can pick up their phone and scroll through Twitter and be frighteningly less bored. Every book is like a new tool, a new kitchen knife, a new camera, a new lens. Almost everybody, pretty much everybody, has some kind of favorite kind of toy that they buy or want to buy. A new notebook, a new pen, better pencils, a new laptop, doesn't matter. We all buy things we want to buy because we tell ourselves that they are going to solve a problem for us. I have more than 20 cameras. Do you know how many cameras I need? Not 20, that's for sure. My wife reminds me of this. You buy yourself telling you it's going to solve a problem for you. Sometimes the problem is really just that you desire to feel a greater sense of mastery over the world. But you know, as you hold that lovely, flexible kitchen knife, that if you ever do need to skin a dozen tomatoes in under a minute, you'll be able to do it. Fantasy problems are problems too, by the way. I mean, even if the problem that you buy it to solve is not realistic, that doesn't mean you're not feeling that problem. Everyone's number one problem is how to feel better about themselves. It has to have action and tension. It may or may not be a narrative, but it needs to keep moving forward. If you have a reference book and it's an encyclopedia or something and people just dive in, look things up and dive out, there's a limit to this. Likewise, if you go into a washroom and there's a sign over the sink, there's a limit to the structure and the tension, but that doesn't mean that there is no tension there. The idea of whether washing your hands after using the washroom is just a thing you do because boring people want you to, or whether it could actually kill you or your grandmother, is an actual problem that can be communicated. But the forward movement doesn't have to be in a simple straight line. You can toy with the readers. Readers may be here for facts, but they are also here for enjoyment, whether they admit it or not. Even if they don't expect to enjoy reading the book, believe me, if they enjoy it, they will be happy. Never had a person complain that a book was too enjoyable to read. Except for the people who didn't want other people reading it, but that's different. The satisfaction at the end will be enhanced if there's an awareness of the obstacles to its achievement. But also maintain the tension. No scenic detours. As I told one writer, you're a good and very fluid writer, so there's nothing that stands out as an easy cut, but you sometimes take a more scenic route when a more direct one would be most effective. I use the word effective 1,000,000 times every book. That is really what it's about. Not good, not bad, effective. Have a look at the kinds of suggestions I've given in a few places, and as you do the revisions for this round, also keep an eye out for other places where you can tighten it by, for instance, taking out 1 or 2 of several examples. Here's another. At times you have extended sections talking about bigger issues, except as they relate directly to something that the reader can use. Those are really for a whole different book. This is one of the great things you can do when doing structural editing. If you want them to get rid of stuff, tell them that's your next book. It works a treat. Sometimes it even gets you another book to work on. Keep it crisp, vivid, economical, and directed at the reader. At times, also, it reads as though you were thinking through the issue as you wrote it down, and you cover the same point from a number of closely related angles. That's normal enough for a first draft, but for a revised and tightened draft, a lot of that can be trimmed. You also add details like hedges and disclaimers that serve mainly to cushion the hard bits. It's like bubble wrap, and you can leave it aside. Cut the verbal bubble wrap. I'm going to say that again because I love it. Cut the verbal bubble wrap. Bubble wrap is for sitting around popping and annoying other people as you pop it. I used to work with a guy who did that all the time. It is not for books. Keep it moving. Not all facts are equally essential. People will lose the important information if you bury it in less important stuff. And they won't get to the hard edges if they aren't bubble wrap. I use the bridge metaphor with authors a lot. As I say, I think you already know a book structure should be like a suspension bridge. The main thing is to make sure that all the cables holding up this bridge are at full tension, which means doing away with a few that aren't helping carry the load. And the way to do this, I told this author for your book, is by setting the cables out plainly, setting down the structure by sections, chapters, subheads, and then putting in what's going to pull the reader through and not putting in anything that, interesting as it may be in its own right, isn't pulling any weight. No decorative cables. There is a courthouse somewhere in the southern U.S. that has columns all the way across the front, and if you come up close, there's a gap of about this much between the top of the column and what they're supposed to support. And it is because the architect designed this thing knowing that it didn't need very many columns, but the people who hired him to build it said, no, you're going to need more columns. You really are. And he said, fine, you want columns? I'll give you columns. Call them as I see them. But he put that in just as a way to prove his point. You don't need to do that. So your readers have a problem. They want to get to the resolution. Never forget, they will always be asking, what do I do? They need clear things they can do. It's amazing how often authors will talk about a problem and give general ideas about a problem, and you can come away thinking, okay, but what do I do? It's like buying a cookbook that says, yes, chiffon cake is a very good cake to make. It involves these general ingredients, and people love it, especially if you flavor it this way, and then they don't actually tell you how to make it. It's not that all nonfiction books are like cookbooks exactly, but they all have a certain amount in common with them. And it doesn't have to be bullet points. You don't have to have, okay, ding, 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 do this, do this, do this. It doesn't even have to be in imperatives, although imperatives addressing the reader are often very effective. But depending on the genre, you can just say, well, here are things that other people have done and they got good results. They exactly did this and this. There's also, this isn't exactly a thing I would normally recommend, but there's a clever thing that a friend pointed out to me once. I think it was The Economist had world travel guides for businessmen. And in these travel guides, they had a section for places to avoid. If you are not interested in encountering certain kinds of nightlife and so forth, do not go to this place. We had a joke, yes. If you don't want a good time, don't call this number, don't talk to this concierge, specifically the one on the left. Clearly, this is not a thing you normally do, but be aware that there are options for communicating to a reader most effectively. People do like to feel smart. And the ending. Some authors are very not good at ending their books. They just stop. I've often used the metaphor of a fireworks show. When you're watching fireworks, how do you know that the show is ending? They don't just go boom, boom. It's boom, 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 boom. You know, and all the dogs in the neighborhood are having their worst day ever. The car alarms are going off. The end of a book has to feel like an end. It doesn't have to have the but it has to feel like the end. And you have to make sure you've cooked and served everything that's on the menu too. You have to make sure that all the loose ends are tied up and you feel like you've gotten to the end of a book and that you have a place to go from there. Often back to the book again, to refer to it again, and then to tell your friends to read it too. Buy their own copy. It has to show there's a way forward, because when you get across a bridge, you usually keep going. Oh, and then there's one other thing you need to watch out for. That's a big thing, and that is legal issues. Because this is also about desires. The desires of other people in the world. Your desire as an editor to do a good job that will help the author avoid undue trouble and expense, such as unpleasant letters from lawyers appearing in their inbox. So these are also things that are always going to come up in a structural and substantive edit. And it's just a thing that I can't not talk about desires without talking about. Has everybody have all quotes been cleared? Do you have proper disclaimers? Have you only in case of dire emergency quoted from copyrighted music? You know the music industry exists mostly to pay lawyers, as far as I can tell. I love music. Music is a great thing. The music industry mostly exists to pay lawyers, as far as I can tell. And if you're in the music industry and are a lawyer, don't sue me. I didn't quote from any songs. I remember talking once with a friend, a fellow editor, who had met someone who said that she was a writer. And my friend asked, oh, what kind of writing? Is it technical writing? Is it magazine writing? And the new acquaintance said, I write from the heart. And my friend told me this, and we just looked at each other and we said, oh no! But, well, I wouldn't recommend making that the dominant mood of your writing if you're making a career of it. The truth is, every writer writes from the heart, even if they don't admit it. They have something they love, something they want, even if it's just to be famous and make a lot of money. I've worked with quite a few authors who don't really want anything other than to have a book that they can sell that will improve their business and make them money. Okay, that's a legitimate thing. But while you're doing it, you might as well write a good book and people will tell you you're an amazingly good author and so forth. Nobody has ever complained about that. The book is their baby. The editor is the midwife, not the mom. I don't edit from the heart, though. I edit for the heart. The reader's heart, the author's heart, the hearts of everyone else involved in the process. And I edit to find the heart of the book and make it beat. Beat, I tell you. Sorry, went off script. Okay, we have 3 minutes for very rapid questions, or you can ask me afterwards. I'm sorry, I did speed this up a little bit. My apologies, but I hope that it came through reasonably well. Any questions? Oh boy. Yes?
Do you have any advice specifically for working with memoirs, since that's a particularly emotional thing for people?
Boy. I think with memoirs, a lot of the key points I've made matter, especially because this is an author walking several very large dogs. You're going to need to get to know the author really well. And at the same time, the readers don't care unless they care. If the author is a famous person already, then you've already got that anchor and you just have to be not boring. But otherwise, the reader is the hero of the book. Did I actually say that, or did I forget to say that? The reader is the hero of the book. Even in a memoir, the reader is actually the real hero of the book. And it has to be a thing that connects to them, and it has to move forward in ways. And you don't have to be strictly linear. I don't think I made this point enough because I wasn't talking strictly about narratives, but nothing says that you have to do things in strict chronological order. No. I've read a number of biographies of musical groups, and I thought, you know what? You could fix this by stop trying to follow the calendar. Yeah, aside from that, I've only worked on a few memoir-type books, but it's always very deeply involving. Yes?
So what do you do when you're working with an author who continuously sends you chapters and the scope creep goes, and so you're kind of along one line and then they're changing it and mutating it into another? How do you stop the scope creep?
So, yeah, it's a thing that you really have to sort of anticipate and set up at the very beginning. Generally, my position when I'm doing an edit of a book that is as much developmental, where it's still in progress, I will usually tell the author, and I just finished getting through a book, the author's first draft of a book exactly like this. While you're writing it, I'm going to be giving you some feedback as you go, but mostly, number one, finish writing it. I don't care how sloppy it is. We can get to that, but I can't tell you what to do with the whole book until there's a whole book to do it with. I just can't. So I really have to lay the ground rules. Another thing about scope creep, I mean, usually I'm working through a publisher, and we'll have a contract that sets these things down clearly, and either there's a target number of hours, or there's some way of managing this. But if I'm working directly with an author, I need them to understand, here's my estimate, and if we're going over that, I'm going to keep telling you that we're going over that, and you're not going to get anything for free. And I mean, have I ever worked for free? Oh yeah, of course. And have I ever blown way past my estimate when I estimated a fixed amount on a book? Yeah, of course. Have I also ever finished a book way under the estimated time and charged them for the full amount anyway? Of course I have. What they're getting is value. If you can give them value quicker, how is that going to cost them less? Goodness gracious, people pay extra for rush service at the photo lab or the copy shop. But yeah, you really need to set the terms down well in advance. And sometimes things are going to go off the rails. And I don't have any perfect universal advice for that other than to be prepared for the real possibility of it and to keep talking to the author. Always keep talking. Especially, the worse things get, the more you talk. If things are going really badly, the worst thing you can do is stop communicating. Any other? I don't want to run into other time periods here. Oh, I do have books I can sell them. 12 Gifts for Writers makes many of my great points only directed at writers. $5, extremely thin. I was gonna say I'll give a book for free to anybody who buys me a drink, but I brought enough books that I could be comatose if I pulled. I also have a few other fun books, Confessions of a Word Lush, which are fictitious vignettes about enjoyment of words, Songs of Love and Grammar, which are, how did I put it, salacious verse on English usage. I brought 3 copies of my 2 volumes of my cookbook, The Asshole's Guide to Cooking. I also have a couple of copies of my photo book because, of course, photos have everything to do with this, right? Anyway, I will have them with me throughout the conference. I really don't want to have to take them back to Toronto. Thank you all for coming.